Our keynote speaker this morning has one of the most challenging jobs in Washington, and that's saying a lot. While he officially leads DOD efforts to synchronize technology, people, resources, and processes to achieve reform, his real job is to shake things up and tackle the largest management reorganization of the Pentagon since 1986. As the number 3 official at the Department of Defense, working for Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and Deputy Secretary Patrick Shanahan, John J. Gibson II is DOD's first Chief Management Officer. He has the enormous task of setting policy and overseeing all of DOD's business operations to include planning, performance management, information technology management, and resource allocation. Secretary Mattis chose someone with the right background. Previous to his position, Mr. Gibson was the Deputy Chief Management Officer of the Department of Defense. Prior to his current government service, he served in executive positions within the aerospace industry, as well as previous roles with the Air Force and the Department of Defense. A proud Texan, Mr. Gibson is also familiar with the world of defense communities, having previously served on the Abilene Chamber of Commerce Military Affairs Committee. At this time, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage the Chief Management Officer of the Department of Defense, the Honorable John H. Gibson II. Mr. Gibson. Well, Mr. Gibson, welcome to ADC. As you can see, we have a tremendous audience here today. We've had great participation. We have roughly 800 people who are registered from this conference from literally almost all states around the country. So we're very happy to present to you really a good cross-section of communities from across America that support military installations and military missions. We're very pleased that you could join us because we want to hear from the person who in many ways can have the biggest impact on defining how we can work most effectively with the Department of Defense. Let's start this morning with the big picture. As someone who grew up in Texas, obviously you're very used to doing things in a big way, and we know that your work for Secretary Mattis is really balancing disparate interests and the needs of the department as large as the Department of Defense. It's a very, very big thing. How do you go about that big task of making sure that you're able to balance all the balls? It's a very, very big operation. It's very, very complex. What's your general approach as you do your work in that Department of Defense?
Well, Joe, first of all, thanks for having me, and to everyone out there, thanks for your time. And I think if I could maybe come into that with a little bit bigger picture just to begin with, I think a lot of people probably are out there saying, okay, this is all great, but what's a CMO? I get that a lot, believe me. I think just to give you perspective so I can get to your question, that quite some time ago, the Congress said the Department of Defense is a large operation, and in addition to executing the mission, we need to also understand how do we manage the business. The operating title, Chief Management Officer, was given to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, so that was a dual-hatted type role. But the department has continued to grow, become more complex. By ourselves, we are the 11th largest economy in the world. And Congress continued to say, we really feel like to give the business operations the look that it needs to have more focus, more dedication. So in the language in 2017, the title of Deputy Secretary of Defense, which is also considered the Chief Operating Officer, was split from the Chief Management Officer, and then this role was created at the beginning of February of this year. And it was to truly focus on the business operations of the department. I would ask, maybe for a show of hands out there, how many of you have read the unclassified version of the National Defense Strategy? That's great. Secretary Mattis would be very excited. I think what's important is, some would say for the first time, we actually have in advance a very cohesive, defined strategy on what we're doing. And that includes his third priority, which is reforming the department. And so really getting back to your question, which started this, is, okay, we're going to look at this, and there's a great deal of what we do that are common shared type services. And we're going to start to apply a look at those. I was asked the other day, okay, how do you approach this? And I somewhat look at it that I'm involved in an organization, and we just acquired all these entities. We acquired these services. We acquired these 27 defense agency and field activities. How do we bring them together, allow them to continue to do what they do that's very proprietary, but then how do we bring synergy and operational efficiency to the rest of it? So we're focusing on shared business areas. We're in cross-functional teams that can get out and bring great ideas together. We're willing to take centers of excellence and give them room to run. And then my role is to bring all that together and facilitate that happening.
Well, that's a very big job, no doubt, and I think you did that quite well in telling us the big picture. Let me ask a specific question. Let me drill down just a little bit. What are some of the real property and community services initiatives? How will reform efforts expand to the services? Many people here are really committed to understanding how to work best with the Department of Defense, and I think those are key questions.
Well, in those particular areas, we have a number of things going. I think I might address for everybody, and first in the community services area. There have been a number of studies that have said between the commissaries and the exchanges, because you have a number of businesses that often have similar both missions and then execution. Because of commonalities, there are efficiencies. So what we've done is said, okay, there have been a number of studies that's still valid. How do we find greater efficiencies there, yet keeping the whole system itself robust? So one of our major areas in our projects in community services is to look at combining, and I say that, I shouldn't say combining, is let's say finding efficiencies, because at this point, we don't know how it's going to look, in the back office functions of the commissaries and exchanges. Now, there have been a lot of things written, and some of it not very flattering, but that this is truly taking away the benefit, this is combining the commissaries and exchanges completely. That's not true at all. We respect the benefit. We respect the potential for spousal employment. We recognize that this brand that is customer-facing has a significant place in who we are. That's not being touched. But we also believe there's tremendous opportunity when you have several different major operations to find benefits in that back office. So we've established a task force. We're going to look at that really from an M&A type look. Let's validate that exists, and then let's put a roadmap how to get there. From a real property standpoint, we know there's opportunities to manage real property as an enterprise. And when we get the services together, when we get what we'll call the fourth estate, and OSD and the agencies together, how we look at services contracts, how we look at excess capacity on a facility, those type of projects, and we look at it enterprise-wide, we think there's an opportunity to do that more efficiently and effectively. The last thing I'll say in that particular area is we're just not stopping at the DOD fence line. And there's opportunities going on at whole of government in how we manage facilities, how we manage leases, how we manage capacity. And we're interacting with OMB and GSA and saying, how can we do this whole of government better? And it's a two-way street. Sometimes we can leverage what they're doing, and sometimes others can leverage what we're doing, all with the goal of operating in those areas more efficiently and more effectively.
Mr. Gibson, you've given a great view here of processes that you have underway internally to reform the way the Department of Defense does business and your relationship with the services. And those are all very exciting, and I'm sure will produce great results. One of the things that a lot of people here are extremely interested in is the outside the gate or outside the fence view into the installation, and particularly how the partnership between communities that surround defense installations, defense facilities, and their ability to create a working relationship through various kinds of programs, and how that might roll out and what your view is. You know, Air Force Secretary Wilson was here yesterday and talked extensively about the value of partnership on several different levels, and talked about military value being measured in terms of the relationship with the community that's expressed in a variety of different ways. So I guess I'm interested in your view of what that partnership should look like with communities, how it can support installations, and how best to foster that working environment that supports mission and also makes a good livable place for our communities.
Well, I can tell you that having been in the building, out of the building, and seen it from an industry side, seen it from a community side, but seen it within, I see that private side of just being incredibly invaluable to who we are. And I think, yes, in real property, but frankly, in everything we do. I was at a reception last night and having a conversation, and the comment was, we need to tap into what makes America great. And the sense of support, the sense of innovation, the sense of creativity, the willingness to interface and provide value. We always need to be doing a better job to tap into that. I know that you mentioned that when my time in Abilene, I was part of a community that just had a tremendous willingness to support the facility and the base and the troops, and were willing to do something about it. Whether it was the efforts with gray water, whether it was the efforts with alternative energies or others, I think that is foundational. I think one of the great frustrations everybody has is, okay, we're willing to do this. How do we do it? I think we all know to walk up to the gate and say, hey, I'm here with a great idea. We just don't receive that very well. Bad things can happen if someone attempts that. And I joke about it and say, somebody has a great idea and they come knock on the front door of the Pentagon, they're likely to end up on the ground with dogs around them more than tell me what your great idea is. So it's how do you penetrate that? And I would offer up to folks out there is right now I'm seeing something which is incredibly refreshing, and that is a willingness to do things differently. And that you hear that at the top level, but the real question is, does it permeate and go down into execution? And what I'm seeing is the answer is yes. So work locally, work here, work through the press, work through your congressional representatives, and keep pushing, because you've got a more fertile environment, I think, than we've ever seen. And so it's essential. And we're not going to get there with the resources we have. We're going to have to count on being creative and filling that gap. And with public and private partnerships, that is a tremendous way to do it.
Well, I'd provide just a little bit of a response, I suppose. I'm sure all the communities here, states, other organizations that are represented are willing to meet you halfway in that effort to do things differently. And the association is very focused on making sure that we are researched in what we do, that we have good data behind us, that we have good best practices, and that we understand how to work with the Department of Defense. So we appreciate that outreach. I think that's an excellent one. Let me now turn to Congress. Obviously, we all work with our members of Congress, and obviously the Department of Defense needs good support in your reform efforts. So how do congressional efforts related to the reform and community services align with the Department's reform efforts? Is Congress being supportive to the extent that they need to be? If not, I suppose we should hear about that as well.
I would say this, when I was asked if I'd be interested in coming back, I think you mentioned my first go-round. My answer was absolutely not. I had a great life. It was no thank you. Secretary Mattis is a pretty good salesman. But I knew part of my hesitation was knowing what we're being asked to do, how hard it is. And I said, it's going to take not necessarily willingness by an administration in the building, but it's going to have to take Congress. I look at them as our board, and that board has to be involved and be prepared. One of the things I've found, both early and continuously, is a much more universal willingness to support this. I think when we talk about reforming the business operations of the department, that is very much an apolitical issue. We are talking about lowering the cost of doing business to provide more resources back to our men and women in uniform to meet the Secretary's first priority. And when you do that, that's just good business, and it's the right thing to do on behalf of the taxpayers. So Congress has rallied around that. And so as I was going through the confirmation process, I was hearing that over and over, which was a very good sign. But more importantly, I'm continuing to hear it. And I'm up on the Hill probably, well, let's just say frequently. And I'm going this afternoon. And it's a very, very fertile ground to tell us what we can do. And it's not just lip service. It's like, okay, I've got a hard one for you. And it's, all right, let's see how we can work that. So I would say probably as aligned with us as we've ever been, and very supportive. Does that mean it's going to be easy? Well, of course not. But I think it's a great starting point. So I think that's one of the legs of the stool that has to be there, and I'm very positive about it.
I guess a question for me, I work at the state level, but I previously worked at an installation support organization in a community, and I certainly have this perspective. As you think about sort of the role that our communities and states and other support organizations around the country have in, and again, supporting installations, supporting missions, supporting service members and their families, and the role that you knew all well about at Abilene. What's most important for our leaders to understand about your efforts going forward? How do they communicate with you what their views are? Obviously, we've covered lots of policy issues during this conference. We'll talk about some more of them. We have been to the Hill and expressed some of our concerns about some issues, hopefully all well-researched and with good reason. What's the most important message that you can give to all these leaders out here from around the country in terms of how best to work with you, how best to communicate their concerns going forward? Obviously, we do that with our congressional delegation. Certainly would like to with the services and with the department.
Keep pressing. Press through all channels. I think you'll find, as I mentioned before, a very willing and able leadership because we are aligned. Press through organizations such as this. And I would also say be willing to be creative. The secretary says this occasionally, and I really enjoy it because we need to be reminded. He said, don't fall into the myth. A lot of times you'll hear you can't do that. And he says it's myth. And he said, don't accept that. He said, pull on it, push on it. And you'll also, as part of that, go, well, you can't do it because it's the law. Show me the law. And often you'll find it's just myth or legend that's been passed down. And if there is a law, there you go. Go to Congress and say, we have a solution to this. If you will change this, we can provide the value we're looking for. So keep pressing. I wish we could do this all day long because this is where the great ideas come from. But be reaching out. Don't accept the myth. You know, we're aligned on what we want to do. We need value, and you're willing to provide value. So if we're aligned, we can get there and use all channels you've got and keep coming up with those innovative ideas.
So I want to drill down just a little bit in that answer. I think that's a great one. One of the concerns that communities and states have as funding and policymaking happen here in Washington with regard to the services is increases and decreases in force structure and in strength at our various installations. And you mentioned Abilene, one good example, and your old community experienced it, I know, and Fort Riley and lots of other places across the country close to where I'm from have experienced ups and downs. And the defense community leaders here, state leaders and others, really are charged with trying to not only build a good quality of life in communities, but also rise to the challenge to provide the necessary facilities, infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools, all the other things that are necessary to support missions. And the flip side of that growth when it happens is obviously terminations, downsizing, cutbacks that also affect communities surrounding military bases. We sometimes get really focused on BRAC exercises. BRAC is not something, obviously, that we're talking about a great deal just at the moment, and I'm sure some people agree and some people disagree that we should. But I think it's an issue that a lot of communities are really kind of concerned about. So how do we work most strategically? How do we work in a strategic way with the services, with the department to plan in advance on mission conversion, growth, and the flip side of the coin, large decreases that affect communities?
Well, I think when if you start with the NDS, that's a great start because then those out there know if I can know where the department needs to focus from a mission standpoint based on the threats, and then I can begin to say, how do those missions line up and so forth. Frankly, I think just what I know, having been involved in a community that supports a facility, and then my time previously in the Air Force and out and about among communities, frankly, I think everybody does a great job. I think we have a group of folks that are here. They're incredibly knowledgeable, aware, involved, communicating. I think if you continue to do that, and all up and down the line from not only starting at, for example, Secretary Wilson was here, understanding what she needs to do, and General Goldfein to execute their mission, and then how that goes down through the hierarchy and ends up at your facility. That awareness and communication is invaluable. And then understanding our challenges in executing that mission and how it translates to a facility. You're then in a position to say, okay, we're going to have gaps, we're going to have shortfalls. How do we help you in addressing that? Frankly, I think the organizations out there do a tremendous job. And it goes back to maybe your opening comment. When everyone's aligned and you know our strategy and know where we need to go and how we need to execute it, then everyone here can fall into that and marry up to that. And we hope that's part of what is happening with what the Secretary's done with the strategy.
Well, and I might just take this opportunity, since I have the microphone, to say would hope that you would pass along to Secretary Mattis and to Secretary Shanahan the fact that we had 800 or so people from most of the states around the country here, really focused on understanding the reforms that you have underway that will benefit the services, will benefit our readiness, and the other priorities the Secretary has laid out, and also really caring about what happens locally, caring about service members and families, and really creating strong communities that support readiness. You know, one of the things that Secretary Wilson said here yesterday, which is something that got our attention, she talked about the connection between military value. I'm getting a little bit over on the military mission side here rather than the management side, but the connection between military value and quality of life in communities. We've all struggled with how to measure quality of life and how to present that at times when the department is considering having to do downsizings, as an example. What's your just general broad take on how you measure those good community supports and how you value them, particularly at a time when you have to make really tough decisions about having to pull down in strength at a particular installation? Is there just a general thought process that we should go through and how to measure that? Threw a little curveball at you there, so.
That's okay. Maybe I can give you more of a perspective from just my time sitting out there as one of the folks here. That's incredibly hard to measure, but it's real. When you have a great environment, and that's driven of so many things in that quality of life that Secretary Wilson talked about. But remember, the men and women that serve in uniform, it's not just them, it's their families. And when the family is happy, then that service member is at the top of their game. And that's just, we're all like that. I know that when things are unsettled at the home front, you know, there's always that little unknown in the back. And it's the simple things that the schools and where to shop and the quality of the housing that make life run smooth and comfortable. So as we know that when service members can say, where do you want to go? And they write it down, the sushi menu of I want a number 1, 2, and the 3. It starts to manifest itself. So is it really measured and measurable? Maybe not the way that we look at flying hours or manpower, but it's real, and there's an awareness of it. And I guess maybe it's like a lot of things. You definitely know it when it's not right and it's not there. So I don't know any other way to, maybe I just didn't swing at your curveball, but I know it's real, and we're aware of it.
That's very good. Sometimes we sort of wonder in the big picture of things whether those officials in charge of leading our Department of Defense understand the great commitment out here on the part of these communities to making sure that installations are strong, service members and families have a good environment to live. So thank you for your perspective on that. We're getting down close to the end of our time here. I guess one final question. Could you provide us with some examples of lessons learned, good experiences that you've had to this point in your service in the Department of Defense, both in your current position and prior position, that can guide our efforts looking forward? Our organization here is growing. This is the largest crowd, by the way, we've ever had at one of these national summits, and it's up substantially over the last couple of years. We think it's going to continue to grow because of the good outreach of the association and the great commitment on the part of these communities. But give us some examples of lessons learned, some ideas that could help guide our efforts. You touched on a couple of them earlier, but from your vantage point, what should we focus on? What should we do to best serve our national defense, serve our communities, serve those folks who have the uniform on and their families?
Well, again, having been involved on your side and having an appreciation of it, I would say, again, I'm being redundant, but keep doing what you're doing. The other is, again, to follow on what I said earlier, we are probably more receptive now than ever to new ideas of innovation, innovative ways to achieve success. And those great ideas can come from anywhere. If we think they're going to come from inside the building, my goodness, we're myopic. And so keep bringing those forth. And I'm going to throw you a bit of a curve in that I know we're often faced on physical infrastructure, but you all represent communities. And there is a tremendous opportunity as we now look at innovation in technologies, in products, in systems that are occurring maybe in your communities that aren't necessarily facilities driven, but could be a technology that might be applied to a weapon system or to space or to something else that we're doing that can help us achieve what we're trying to do in the national defense strategy. Bring those forth too. I mean, you might find a business in your community of 10 or 15 people that is just something that is Shazam. Bring it forward. Don't stop at facilities. And I will tell you this, that you talk about a lesson learned. I did this in my first jobs, and I continue to do it. It's all about relationships. It doesn't matter how big we are. It is all about relationships. And I get more done when I walk out of the office, and I know it drives our staff nuts that I just disappear, and he's off the leash. You know, there's no telling where he's going. But I can walk down the hall and talk to somebody that and say, just walk in, say, you know what, we're talking about this. Do you really understand where we are? No, I don't. Well, here's what we'd like to do. Are you okay with that? We want to make sure that you're oh, I'm good with it. And you move on. Well, that was about 3 weeks of coordination through the normal process. But it's about relationships. And that occurs at our level, and it occurs with you all. And I just, these communities have done phenomenal work, laying great relationships. Use them, leverage them, bring those ideas forward. Then it's on us to let those trickle up or down, that we actually get some traction. So I think you can strip it all away, but it's about those relationships. And so I'd keep pressing, and hopefully you'll find on our part that it's maybe as good an environment as you've ever found.
Mr. Gibson, our time's up. I want to thank you very much for coming to be here. Been a very illuminating discussion, I think, and it's a great opportunity, I think, for all the attendees here to understand the reforms that you have underway and what the department will look like and how it will be displayed going forward. We'd also like to, again, ask for an ongoing dialogue, hopefully such that we can provide value to the Department of Defense and our community partners can continue to understand how the reforms are going to affect them, and as we continue to be a partner, a team member, as we all try to build strong communities and strong bases. So I want to thank you very much. Would you all help me in welcoming and thanking our Chief Management Officer, Mr. Gibson?